Welcome very, very much to Conversation. We're having as a guest now Mark C. Johnson, and he's a very interesting gentleman we've run into the last couple of days in reintroducing me to an understanding of the importance of an organization that he's the executive director of. It's called the Fellowship for Reconciliation USA. I've been aware of it for decades, but not in the degree that it's come to my attention now that we're have met at an event and we're talking to him. And welcome, Mark, very much to Conversation.
Pleasure to be here.
Maybe you could share your own background, and we'll be talking about also the fellowship. But we did it in an earlier take. But could you share your background? You're apparently from New York. Huh?
Yeah, I was born in Buffalo, but really grew up in Rochester, New York in the 50s and 60s. My father moved there to work for Eastman Kodak Company, so we were part of the growth of that company. So I was raised in a suburb of Rochester, went to a public high school, and was very active in the Presbyterian Church as a young adult, both at the state and the national level as well.
Right from being youthful, and that was encouraged by the family?
Yeah, the family's 3 or 4 generations.
I see.
But I also think that that period of the returning veterans from the Second World War understood the faith community to be one of the paths in which status was established and sort of community built, and so it was a part of our community.
Yeah, it had been traditional. Right.
And you know, the GI Bill and other things gave people opportunities that hadn't been available generations before that.
We were about to emerge as the major power in the world, having been successfully completed the war.
So I began a path to sort of a radical understanding of racial and economic issues in Rochester in the 60s. During
Justice issues.
Justice issues.
Was that encouraged around the dinner table, that kind of
but
ethic,
more
or did it come out of the church, or what?
Yeah, more out of the youth group, out of the young Turks, the young pastors who were doing the youth groups. And I took that to a Presbyterian college in Ohio, the College of Wooster. And so I think we are generations in which we share a lot in common. So our response to the war in Vietnam radicalized us further.
Radicalized the whole nation, it seems to me.
Yeah, in terms of questioning
authority. It was a major event.
Yes.
At a time of major intellectual stirring around the world. There was something going on in that period, in my humble opinion, that was existentially significant, even in an evolutionary sense. But that's a sidebar.
Yeah.
But it was blowing in the wind, Bobby Dylan said, with his songs and poetry.
Well, in my experience, adds layers to that because I spent my junior year at the American University of Beirut.
Wonderful, yeah.
And was first there exposed then to the already aging conflict between Israel and Palestinians. There were Palestinian refugee camps, and the American University campus was full of Palestinian intellectuals who value that education. I spent that summer in Europe on a program using World War II wheat credits to have conversations with Yugoslav students. So
Wheat credits?
Wheat credits, yeah. There were.
Oh, the exchange of the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's not unlike the way we do foreign policy today. You know, we don't just give money to other countries. We give them the right to buy products from us.
It helps our market.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
And so the wheat credits were like that.
I see.
Yugoslavia had to use the funds that we'd given them to do things that benefited us, like intellectual interchange or good. So I was in Europe during that summer of 1968 and saw this globally spreading unrest and resistance to a increasingly militarized society.
Right.
And so it was that experience that really introduced me to the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the opportunities for conscientious objection. And I spent my senior year in Worcester, and then it was Nels Ferre, who was the theologian who had been a conscientious objector during the First World War, who introduced me to FOR through his counseling on my interest to be a conscientious objector. I went back to Lebanon and spent 5 years there doing conscientious objection.
That's a long time. Were you at university study, or were you working in an organization, or
a lot of different things?
You were soaking up a lot of the culture.
That's right.
Yeah, you've got a great experience there. That's a long time.
We were related to a campus ministry that the Presbyterians ran. We were related to the Lebanese YMCA. I met my wife there, and we both worked for the Lebanese YMCA.
Okay.
I studied at the American University, and I taught at an Armenian college, Hagazian College, the only English language Armenian college, the only college outside of
Were you
Armenia.
were you teaching at that? You're young. Were you teaching English as a second language?
Started out
or?
teaching English, but I was studying political science and sociology. So the last couple of years I taught sociology.
How did you get to that then? And how did you get? I'm sorry. You have a spiritual basis in terms of your ethic and that. So
I certainly have a faith community tradition that's important to me.
Faith community, yeah. That's important. And would you count yourself a Christian?
A cultural Christian, I think.
Cultural
Yeah.
Christian.
Maybe even a secular Christian, but
a secular Christian.
I certainly do have probably a core of a Christian identity and understanding that has shaped me, certainly.
Yeah, and then that's treated you well in terms of being able to understand the contributions of people like Gandhi and Martin King and that. And you had a commitment to the racial issues growing out of some of your experience, I guess. There were race riots and that kind of thing that's been there. And we were living, as Gunnar Myrdal said, the American dilemma was racism, and we had apartheid in this country. It was absurdly behind and everything, and that was coming to a fore in terms, and then also we were fighting that horrendous war in Vietnam.
Well, and the critique that my Palestinian and Lebanese classmates offered was something I never would have gotten in the United States.
What was that?
Well, the Palestinians even then could well understand themselves as an oppressed people, an occupied population, and they could see the black experience as one of oppression and occupation. They could seek resonance in there.
Right.
King was assassinated while I was in Lebanon. Robert Kennedy was assassinated while I was in Lebanon. So the tendency to political violence as a way of addressing cultural dilemmas in the United States was poignant and real to students there.
I see the connection. Right.
Lebanon had a civil war in the 1860s. China had a civil war in the 1860s. We often see our history as particular, when in fact, as you were suggesting earlier, there are things happening globally in terms of rising consciousness, awareness of inequities and injustice, problems of race that still haunt us today.
They do indeed. Unfortunately, it's still there, raising ugly head. I just saw on the television last night that in Egypt the military, who's been a sort of anchoring force after their ousting of Mr. Mubarak and so on, that they've reinstated the emergency law. So that means you can be put in prison and locked up and have they've gone back to that 40 million people living in utter poverty and so forth. Problems are still there despite the the wonderful spring that we talk about in Egypt. It rears its ugly head, the injustice that is the basis of so much dissent.
There's a wonderful line of the growing capacity to be in solidarity with people around the world relative to injustice and inequity. And it goes back in this way to the civil rights movement in the United States, that in 1953, when a young pastor, Martin Luther King Jr., was invited to become the leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association. A.J. Muste, the head of FOR, sent Bayard Rustin down. Rustin had helped FOR become more acquainted with Gandhi. There were Richard Gregg and Bayard Rustin and a number of others had been to India and met Gandhi and were studying with Gandhi. So they took the
John Lewis also in that
John
camp?
Lewis, James Farmer,
James Farmer,
Phil and Jim Lawson,
right.
A lot of them.
So it was brewing. It was going to come up into real fruition with the Voting Rights Act and all that, but it was a feisty time, and they were confronting that down south with the Freedom Riders and all of that.
And out of that, the experience and the success of Montgomery, the Fellowship of Reconciliation wrote a comic book called The Montgomery Bus Story.
We have it here. Let's see here. Let's see. I'll hold it up. I'll give you time to come in. I don't see where. Here's the camera. I'll hold it up. You can come in on it. This is a really well done comic book that was done by some of the Al Cap people, I understand.
That's right. Yeah, Alan Hassler, who was the head of FOR.
So you can look at that, and it's a comic book. And let me show you. I'll just 10 cents. That's a good price. I remember when comics were 10 cents.
Even today, it's only $3.
It's a comic book. It's gone from 10 cents to $3. But this comic book, this is a way to get through to consciousness. And this has been translated into Farsi and a whole lot of other languages and gets around, see? So it's a comic book that spells out some of these things about Mr. King, right?
Jim Farmer and Jim Lawson and others say they used to go to Memphis or Nashville or Charlottesville 2 or 3 days in advance of an event. They'd open up the trunks of their car and they would distribute the comic book.
Yeah, it says how 50,000 Negroes found a new way to end racial discrimination. That's really good. This serves well, doesn't it?
It
this
does.
Kind of thing.
Well, and the reason that it ties back to Egypt and the Arab Spring is that a year and a half ago, 1,400 of us from 40 different nations went to Cairo in January of 2010 with the intention of going into Gaza and being present with the Palestinians a year after.
Were you trying to break the siege? Or
trying to break the siege, trying to open the gates of Rafah.
You weren't on one of those boats trying to do it?
No, there were some earlier boats, but this was before the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. This was a year earlier.
Rafah Gate or something? Or
at the Rafah Gate, yes.
Yeah, is that where you were then? And you were challenging that?
That's right.
You must have gotten some flack from some of the people in Israel.
We did, and some of the people in the United States, and some of the people in Egypt.
Yeah,
yeah.
And so, yeah.
So, but the interesting thing to me was that the journalism syndicate in Cairo served as an unofficial host to a lot of our gatherings. And as we talked with journalists and other Egyptians, it was clear that there was a long period of preparation already well underway that led to Tahrir Square and the Arab Spring. Well, and in fact, the discovery of this comic book by Dalia Ziadi a year earlier during an internship here led to its translation and its availability there.
And it's distributed through the fellowship?
No, it's through the American Islamic Congress and some of the other groups in Cairo and Egypt.
That's really good, and it's in different language. That's a good way to get a message out and so forth. It goes back to 1914, and that goes way back in a certain sense. And I'm wondering, we were talking earlier off camera about human relationships and so forth. And we have a tradition of what they call, I did doctoral work in geography and political geography and read Hans Morgenthau, Reinhold Niebuhr, and but particularly the view of, a proud view in a lot of people's way of thinking of what they call realpolitik. Or, real, it could be if you, so you've got to be realistic. You can't be idealistic in terms of being scientifically understanding power relationships. And what you should understand, they drum into your head, is what matters is who's got the power. If you have the power and you win, then you can set the rules. And that's the objection. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So how are we going to deal with a world where you have some inordinate power both between the nations of the world and the classes of the world that is so absurdly skewed in favor of those who were of the landed gentry and the people who had accumulated wealth, and they get accumulated capital, and they own all the assets, they have all the power, they have control over media, they have control over the means of production, they own all the resources and that sort of thing. They have such overwhelming power. Or just culturally, let's say, just take it for another step, where the Europeans came to this continent and they encountered the Indian nations that were here. They had the steam engine, they had machines, they had rifles, they had all the power, and there was no way that the people who represented another culture that was rooted ecologically very nicely with nature and all of that could resist. And power comes out of the end of a gun, that and it's so skewed. How can we deal with a situation like that where it exists and still be realistic in saying, why are the people rebelling, or why are they trying to rebel? After all, because don't they realize they're serfs on a feudal estate owned by a small plutocratic class, as always has been since Rome, feudal times, and now?
Well, certainly we romanticize and reify that power in a way that makes us accept an argument that we all own a piece of it. And we are all complicit. We are, many of us, complicit. I mean, we do live our lives in the luxury that's created in ways that it becomes addictive. Your introduction to Hans Morgenthau and others remind me that, again, at the College of Wooster, on its 100th anniversary in the 60s, I was the editor of the college newspaper, a reporter.
Yes.
And Barbara Ward Jackson and Morgenthau and Norman Borlaug.
All of
those people were speaking as a part of the 100th anniversary
he won the
of the
Nobel
college.
Prize. Norman Borlaug,
for important work in agriculture in terms of increasing production. But so today we have Monsanto trying to both do genetic modified organisms and trying to patent these in ways that control the production globally. So, at the same time that we're exploring the possibilities of thinking critically about what this means, we're also being brought into a narrative that does celebrate American exceptionalism, the creativity of American science, the capacity of American capital, that makes it very hard for us to maintain the critique, maintain the distance. And again, it goes back to those of us who have had the opportunity to live longer periods of time abroad or travel more widely, find ourselves sort of the curtain being drawn a bit to see our history and culture in a different way. The Fellowship of Reconciliation is in 55 countries around the world.
They spread,
And we gather only quadrennially, but again, it's a wonderful moment of enlightenment to understand what people in Chad or people in Nepal or people in Sri Lanka are finding themselves needing to do to try to answer that question. How do we redistribute power in a way that there's greater equity and justice in the world? There isn't an easy answer.
There isn't, and I think the trend is moving away from it seems, although we do have progress. We're learning, we're doing more. We're learning intellectually, we're learning, and we're getting more power. And also, if I may, just philosophically for a moment, we're understanding things, evolution. Mr. Darwin comes, we begin to understand things so that we can understand our existence on this planet and so forth in terms that Cro-Magnon cavemen or other peoples who were part of our lineage. I just had my DNA done. It takes it back 60,000 years to Abyssinia and everything. But the science is doing that. But we have that. And then we get to a point where we have a unique capability, it seems to me, as a species. One of the things that's unique is we have the ability to extend our consciousness in a serious way toward to the outer environment, and creating through tools and technology and manipulation of the environment a context other than an Eden-like sense is a lot that most creatures confront the environment, if you understand. We're able to do that to the point now where the distinction's being made not so much against the other creatures, as it were, but against those technological extensions of our capability, which includes and has been led throughout most all of history, if you look at it in a certain way, by those who could make a weapon system that made the prince stronger so he could control the tribe in the other valley, steal their grain, make his tribe strong in the name of what is called realpolitik. And if you're a winner, you're above the law. You set the law. You never go in the dock, that kind of thing. That still serves. That principle still serves. Hans Morgenthau would say, don't be an idealist. Let's not talk about being good, being nice, being true. That isn't what matters. What matters is who's got the power.
What matters is vision, and we were talking earlier
about
the lack
that's another
of the
view that may take a critique of the realpolitik view of the world that serves our political class. It seems to me still.
I'm thinking of 2 or 3 people who fall into that category that broach my argument that finally comes the poet, that in fact there is a path to awareness or understanding that is different than the realpolitik, different than the
Do we agree that the realpolitik rules now?
Yes.
Okay, and has.
Yes,
and it's
has.
getting more. And one of the things those weapons have at a certain point become more and more lethal. They become more and more to where, and I just broached the question before we went on the air, those weapons finally, according to a great deal of modeling that exists, those weapons, we get a big boy, and we get atomic, we get thermonuclear, we get teller, we get bacteriological warfare, we get ability to intimidate the other, so we can win and make our tribe strong, and all our creation stories that serve that.
It might be abuse of tribalism to characterize our work now. We're sort of in a a post-tribal, pre-tribal society. We may be in an experiment in civilization that will fail, and we may rediscover, in fact, that the tribal approach, the approach of community and fellowship, has more to do with the way out of this dilemma than civilization
Well,
does.
let's hope. Maybe that's one of the hopes we would have.
I was on the bus after being arrested in front of the White House the other day.
Good for you.
With one of
for
my,
the climate thing?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
With one of my literary heroes, David Abram.
Okay.
He has two books. The first one was called The Spell of the Sensuous, the role of language in a more than human world.
Yeah.
And his more recent one is Becoming Animal. He makes the argument that, in fact, the roots of the issue today go way back to when we moved from a pictographic to an ideographic alphabet.
That's interesting.
Said that when we began to distance ourselves from the natural world by no longer using pictures of it to tell our story, but began to use abstract alphabets, we wrote ourselves out of the natural world.
That's interesting. McLuhan used to say that about the phonetic alphabet was so so developed Western civilization.
And I think it's Daniel Quinn in his little essay on civilization, who argues that still the best examples of successful human relationship are the tribe. He says the tribe as we know it today is the public television station. It's the community newspaper. It's the circus, where everybody knows all of the roles that have to be accomplished to produce the outcome, and yet still has contributions that are particular to their strengths.
That's interesting, although, that's interesting. I was making the point that the weapon systems that are controlled by the political leadership have become, apparently, from the modeling, that if they're unleashed, Second World War, we were trying to kill ourselves one to the other as best we possibly could, full tilt boogie. Firebomb Dresden with complete air superiority, a war crime. You'll never go in the dock because you're going to win. So you can do whatever you want with them. Firebomb Tokyo, kill, kill, kill. 4 million in Vietnam. But napalm, we can do that. We can do that. But the weapon systems have finally, after the research, and that's where all the money goes. And that's where the money goes to the Pentagon. And that's where the research and the peer-reviewed journals and the academic and that. It goes for that militaristic kind of view of the world. And they finally reached a point, apparently, in the level of modeling around 1970, where they were species lethal. Do you think that's possible? That the weapon systems, now we get there, and we're not talking about anything happening that has anything to do with rationality or anything of that sort. You're talking about maybe a failed world economy. They don't have a system that's going to be able to bring any elemental justice, failed irrational. That if the weapons are unleashed in a spasm of existential anger and the rest of it, which has been too characteristic of the human experience, that we could wipe out our entire species with the weapons that exist? Or do you think that's just not possible?
Well, I think there's a small ray of not possibleness to it, in the sense that it's possible that tribes, that units, that communities of the species might survive, but certainly
there
civilizations.
Might be a few, well, it'd be the end of civilization. I don't think there's any doubt. Even in 1962, if
but
you
you know,
remember.
Kurt Vonnegut
still slaughterhouse
still opens young minds, at least to a questioning orientation to that. Daniel Berrigan and others who beat on those weapons 40 years ago,
God bless them,
are still models for young people today who enter weapons factories and beat on those weapons. There's always a presence of resistance that will be one cause for hope. The other is, Paul Hawken's work.
Sure, yeah.
So his argument that, in fact, there are billions of people who spend parts of their days or weeks committed to that intersection of the natural world, human rights, and environmental rights, who, even as we're sowing the capacity for destruction, are discovering localized, community-level solutions. So the question is that the arc of history has long but bends towards justice.
Thank you, Mr. King.
Will we outrun the threat that we face by building at a grassroots level, at a local level, the skill base necessary to sort of deflect the great model.
Not only the skill base, if I may, but it's also extended consciousness has a tremendous capability of providing for life support. Bucky Fuller, nanotechnology with all kinds of new materials are just over the horizon, just coming now. We may actually be, in terms of that extended capability, we may be actually, as some modeling has suggested, Buckminster Fuller has written an operating manual for Spaceship Earth that we may have at a level of existential capability. We have to make that gap between the capability and the actuality in the name of real. See, the realist thing is that it is not nearly enough. Mankind is by nature and by the physics of the universe inherently selfish and greedy. That's the take that's given in terms of the understanding of the context and so forth. So you've got to guard against that. And that we may be actually transcending material scarcity in terms of the people of this planet. There are more haves than have-nots growing. And he said we got across the 50% mark in terms of capability. Not the reality, but both those things seem to coalesce around that year 1970. There was something existentially new that was coming, and you begin to start looking for punctuated equilibrium or Teilhard de Chardin or some sort of a relationship to the cosmos at a level transcended to the nightmare of injustice, which is only where you could really see realistically the human experience where the strong have always ruled over the weak.
Well,
continues.
Here's a story you'll appreciate for its poignancy, and given that you have an interest in Colombia as well.
I spent time there.
We have 6 staff members who live in Colombia. 3 of them live in San Jose del Partado in a peace community in the role of protective accompaniment. So here a group of 10 agricultural communities from the Yoruba province area who've committed themselves as agrarians, as farmers, to a communal life that has no truck, has no economy with the army, the paramilitary, or the guerrillas. They actually bound their property. They grow bananas, they grow cocoa, they grow coffee. And the other thing that they've done is they have begun to harvest from their cultural and intellectual history those plants that have medicinal uses, those strands of material that are resistant to various sources. They've created a little university now and a library in one of their communities to re-educate themselves. I was there a couple of years ago and we had this conversation. Occasionally they will get cut off from the world. The army will blockade coming and going.
Right. Yeah.
And they said, you know, the only thing that we can't find within our property and that we still need is salt. Otherwise we're completely self-sustaining.
Been like that for a long time. Salt's really amazing, really important.
And why Gandhi used it as his symbol, as the way we organized.
Right. That was a strategy on his part.
So, but I mean, here again are communities that have made a decision in a threatening and frightening world. So Colombia, 40 years civil war, the fourth largest
you had that
population
FARC down there, and you had
displaced people.
But that's it. We have huge assistance, military assistance.
Military presence, bases.
I think the major export we have now are weapons to the world.
We are the largest arms manufacturer
by
in the
far.
world and the largest
And it's
exporter.
one of our largest export industries, and we got these drones going now.
Yeah, it's a real challenge to us because what we have to solve is how do we keep people employed in some work that allows the natural economy of life, exchange of goods that we need to live, to happen when so many are no longer employed in warfare or armaments.
Lord John Maynard Keynes, if I may, who was the one who set up everything in the Depression, and also into the in the aftermath of the Second World War and so forth, a great theoretician and everything. He set all that up, International Monetary Fund, all of that kind of thing, and he wrote a letter to his grandchildren in 1930. And his letter was very interesting because you have two things in economics, and things, it used to be political economy. They connect the two. The two are intimately connected. You can't have a political democracy when you have economic plutocracy. We have economic plutocracy everywhere.
Plantation economics.
Everywhere. Everywhere in the world. It's a few people own all the assets. But he set up a thing, he sent a letter to his grandchildren, he said, in their maturity, they'd be about now, it's hard for us to understand But because he was about setting up and making sure WPA get jobs for people so that they will have some money to buy things. That's having demand, effective demand, where you have money to clear the market of what can be produced in an overflowing production capability. And he said that in their maturity, you're going to be confronted with something that's very hard to understand, and that's massive technologically induced unemployment, because the means of needing employees, individuals, like serfs on a feudal estate, which is what it is really, is not going to be needed, and you're not going to have the means of distributing the buying power to the people to clear the market. That's coming true now, that the thing we're doing now, but all of our all they do is talk about, we've got to create jobs for people. They don't ever say, I asked you whether they were informed by Henry George and the idea of the 19th, 20th century, that the resources have to have ownership, and the progressive community is all bent out of shape over the idea of how wonderful it is to work. And so forth, where the resource, the production is increasingly the result of technological instruments. They have a combine that can produce 60,000 barrels of grain. You don't even have a driver, and they're still trying to say, let's give something to the driver, not have him own any of the assets. And the left is blinkered by that. I'm sorry, but they're going to have to make some peace with the institution of private property, private sector, and instead of it all being concentrated in the hands of a few ownership. No wonder they're getting overwhelmingly wealthy. They own that which is producing wealth, and all they're trying to do is get a job for people. And you get an algorithm that can displace 500,000 people. You can't keep creating jobs in order to distribute demand, and we don't have an answer of how we're going to distribute supply, effective demand, by ownership of the technology responsible for production. We're not addressing that because we're all the academic community, the intellectual community is all strung out on specialization, and they accept this labor theory of value.
So
I mean, and there's no critique. There has to be a critique to hoist capitalism on its own petard. The institution of private property should be shared, and those things, they should have ownership of those means of production, and not be saying they have to, shine the shoes of the master in order to get some money to buy some bread to feed the kids.
We tend to characterize the alternative when it's presented to us as utopian.
Yeah, well, they would call it utopia, which means it's not realistic. So you're not being real. You have to be real.
And it's characterized as utopian
and
by
therefore,
those who are most threatened by the alternative that's presented.
I don't think they would be threatened. I think it could be beneficial to the whole system if you form capital in a way where you give ownership of the private property ownership to the people as a way of distributing income. So people who have a big, if they have a legacy and they have income, they get richer as they sleep. The assets are doing it. So, and they keep it only to a few people who already have accumulated savings. And they've just built that up. So in every system, you got it, and the disparity between those few at the top, a tiny little class, it's all being owned, and it's getting more and more. And the intellectuals of the left or the progressive doesn't criticize it at that theoretical level. I don't know if you can understand.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. And I think, again, I would say the critique comes more often from the world of literature, from poetry, that the prophets from the beginning of time have always spoke in ritualistic ways in poetry. They've always spoken truth to power. They've always presented a narrative of what the consequence will be if we continue to live our lives through greed and exploitation.
But all the poets are saying is get a job for everybody. No, that's all they say. That's the only way they're going to distribute any demand.
We're reading different poets.
Okay, well, who's telling us that we should have ownership of the capital formation of technological production should be owned? Not hirelings on the estate of the people who own it, not serfs on a feudal estate. Owners, in the way the capital is formed, is given to them, and then that is a way for them to get money. They don't have to do anything for it. They don't have to lick the boots of they don't have to, they're getting money, then they can clear the market. We don't do that anywhere. One country that did was Libya. We just bombed them with predators and called them some sort of backward thing. We are the problem in a certain sense because we don't have an image we don't have a vision that the future requires.
Yeah, I think the vision is available. The question
Where?
is, how is it so effectively constrained? Well, it's media. All right, you said before
The media is all owned by the guys who own all the money.
But you suggested earlier that there's the subversive opportunity through public access to tell this story.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
So what are the hurdles to get the alternative narrative widely enough distributed so that people do take it to heart and do change their behaviors in response to it?
Well, I think the progressive community has to get over their swoon to the labor theory of value, because you get your identity all wrapped up in the idea that you're going to be a worker, and you're going to be doing the work, and you're going to find a niche and everything. And it was Marx. It was Marx.
Yeah.
It was the basis of Marx thinking, surplus value, all that. They're all caught up in the idea how wonderful it is to work.
And so we demonize the alternative as socialism or Marxism or utopianism.
Well, socialism would be a thing if you have government. The government can bring resources and that sort of thing. They can distribute it through the government. But in the Soviet Union, they did away with private property.
So what if we
You have a private sector, but you shouldn't allow the private sector to own a small group, the bankers or whatever, to own it all and just say, oh, it's okay, you own it all, go on your yachts, and we'll just maybe pick up some leaves on your estate.
So maybe we should let Bernie Sanders take Vermont and become an independent republic, and let Rick Perry take Texas and become
No, I don't think so. I think we need a national economy that recognizes that when you form capital, you have to you democratize ownership.
So is this what...
Private property ownership of a productive asset should be spread out to everybody, and they don't have to do anything for it.
Is this what Mario Cuomo was trying to do?
No, there's nobody trying to do it. Their only way they can think about getting demand into the hands of the poor people, so you can have a middle class and all of that, is to have them have a job.
Jobs.
On the estate, all owned by a tiny class, and they don't seem to have any, you don't have any ownership. We're serfs. We just want to have a job on your estate so we can take care of the stables and clean out the stables and shine your boots. Well, and those people with the money will set all the templates for all the peer review. Mm-hmm. United, again, the thing the thing that the corporations can put unlimited money into the thing, United thing, that thing that's in the court and everything. Yeah. It's going that way.
Well, I think there is a story. I think there is a movement. I think there's an effort to disband, for example, the
Citizens United. Oh, well, that's Mr. Paul and so forth. Yeah.
Well, Paul has one take on it, but there's another group of people, who identify the root of the issue is the debt, the creation of.
Well, we just went through that. Yeah, we just went through that.
So there are ways of creating economies that are much more local that might, in fact, take advantage of the capacity to distribute wherewithal for day-to-day life without the way in which we've structured around jobs and work historically.
How? I mean, in the private sector. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've invented an algorithm, 500,000 people are displaced. You can't help them go back and push things in and make up work for them to do. If you're going to have an international order where they can be getting 300 times more across the ocean or something.
I think there might be a tribal solution, a local solution. Maybe.
A local solution would be what?
That you have barter. You have people who exchange things they need with one another. And there are economies that are increasingly built around this notion of, first of all, you relive your life into a pre-global set of needs. Yeah, we are spoiled by the fact we can get bananas from Panama and coffee from Arabia and so on. But before global exchange were possible, people still survived. So how do you restructure economy and community around what one is capable of creating at a local level and barter and exchange? How do you extract yourself?
While we keep the Walmart and all the rest of it in place? Everything's going to be in place?
No, I think those things disappear. I mean, Walmart's already suffering from the fact that it's expanded beyond the need that it sees the world having for that form of organization.
Should people then say, well, then, let's see, you don't need, what you could do is get them to go down to, you don't need a lot. You don't need 10-watt light bulb. You can get by with a 5. Mm-hmm. You want people to become parsimonious, poor, accepting that kind of a status as a way of being copped out.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be poor.
Okay.
I mean, look at the tragedy of Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
Lebanon no longer has a national electric system.
Is that right?
The energy that people need to live is all locally. Now, a lot of that is, I mean, that may be an overgeneralization, but that was certainly something that came out of the Civil War and the destruction of infrastructure.
Yeah.
The response to the destruction of infrastructure may not be to rebuild the bridges and roads. It may bring solar technology into a distributed capacity, so you don't need these huge grids for the distribution of electricity or light.
If you could produce all those, so you could cover the Sahara Desert with a photovoltaic thing, and you could get an unlimited amount. If you could do that, and you can pump it out without having people do it, what they're going to do, we could do it, but we have to create, the only way we're going to get buying power to the people is for them to have some job to do, which could be done by technological development.
I think we haven't exhausted what King and Gandhi had to suggest.
Okay.
In terms of the world house, or in terms of the ashram. Again, these were models. Yes, simple living doesn't have to be impoverished living.
No, but that can be a rationalization for you don't really need a house. You can live in that shack at the corner. Oh, well, you could sleep on the bench. You can take that. You can take that attitude, because that's the attitude that the overwhelming wealthy who set things up have toward the people. They don't care about the people. They don't care about the people. They care about their profit.
Yeah.
And they own everything. And they think we should own everything. And any little thing that might come from the government, like Social Security, take that away. Take away Medicare. Take away anything that serves the people, and we'll set up a a system. And that's the way things are trending.
Yeah. Well, and one of the unspoken
and the only
elements.
answer comes is, well, let's make some jobs on their estate. But you don't become an owner of something that's actually producing. The point that I'm saying is they just don't want to accept the idea that there's this transition. If we've transcended scarcity, it's a whole new ballgame forth. It's always been scarce. There's never been enough. It's always zero sum. We've gone through a huge change, this generation, and the intellectual community is falling down on the job of addressing what the future requires, for there to be a liberated planet where people and the ecology can be in order, supply and demand can be there, we can do it, and a way of creating that so that you have leisure, time to be concerned with the things that really matter, like literature, education, and everything, rather than being some corporate slave within a system where you're all on masses estate. And the left accepts it. Seems to accept. The only way to get demand is for them to be like a servant on the plantation.
Well, I am privy, as none of us should be, to hundreds of emails every day.
Okay.
Some portion of which are from a left that isn't accepting of that outcome. So I think there are voices on the left that reject an inevitable capitalist end.
I think it could be hoist on its own petard. William Shakespeare said. Yeah, private property is so great. We're all for the private sector. We're all for that. Good. Let's give it to everybody. Let's democratize it. Can you understand? There has to be hoist on its own petard, because if there's a danger, when you got weapons that could be and still remain species lethal, you can't have a breakdown of the system. You can't have everybody going on a cooperative and getting by with things in a world. You have to take advantage of the technological capability, but you have to have a way that includes all of humanity in a new and liberated capability. People want televisions. They want, houses. They want food. They want things like that. And you got to have a way of providing that within an ecological context, which is available to us at a knowledge base and as a capability. We don't have a system. It's all reifying outdated, zero-sum principles that were operative until about 1970. And we're not providing in the alternative.
I'm not convinced of the necessity.
Okay.
Though I am a person of privilege, I'm a white male, 64 years old, well off. And so it's hard for me to reject what I have as necessary.
Oh, you don't need that. You could just live in a shack.
I could live less,
Yeah, you could do it, and just think how wonderful it is.
But I also think that there are ways of forming relationships and communities that are independent of a great deal of the consumption that structures our lives as we live it today.
Perhaps so, yeah. Perhaps
and
so,
that consumption serves the needs of a very small number of owners of capitalism, and that it becomes more and more complex and more intricate and more addictive and more attractive in order to perpetuate a system of psychology that we've built around consumption in this country. I'm not convinced that that's the way we. And again, McLuhan and others were voices, Fuller and others, Spaceship Earth or McLuhan were warning us a long time ago that we were leading ourselves down this primrose path to an unsustainable future.
Well, unsustainable doesn't have to be unsustainable if you realize that there is, like among others, Fuller and so forth, good design. Ephemeralization, doing more with less. We don't have to rape the planet in order to get production.
Yeah.
The computer chip used to fill this room with vacuum tubes, remember? The transistor had to be invented. It's getting down now to where they're going to have a carbon-60. It's going to be going through the bloodstream and have a distributive capability of electricity, or of information that is staggering, go through the bloodstream. It doesn't have to rape the planet.
But we have 2 or 3 other problems.
What?
In my mind, we have pushed through the way in which we have raped the planet, the capacity of the planet to be self-sustaining or healing, so that we've created a climate condition, and maybe there's a pendulum, maybe there's a natural pendulum there, but we've contributed to it.
You're talking about global warming.
Global warming.
Well, that's a big issue,
cataclysmatizes, if I can make up a word.
Yeah, that's a good word,
The risks that are immediately in front of us. So Christian Parante's new book on the Tropic of Chaos.
Okay.
I mean, we see all around us the risks of climate to social order and distribution. We have to deal with that. Secondly is population. And there may yet be capacity beyond the current population, but the way in which we have addressed population with capacity and distribution aggravates rather than supports that solution.
Well, see, Malthus did that, and Paul Ehrlich, and the population boom and bomb, and all of that kind of stuff. I did a program once with a famous guy, Forrester, Jay Forrester, major systems thinker, wouldn't talk about it on camera. Talking about Fuller. Fuller is talking about how collectively, seeing things comprehensively, not specialized in getting all innocuous or unable to question things comprehensively because you're all specialized out in something. You get focused on one thing, marijuana freedom or ladies or something. You get specialized out rather than seeing the thing whole. And he said that he presented in that world game thing, that was some of the major thinking. We had Robert Theobald and the Triple Revolution and things we're talking about economics. And he posited exactly that we were gaining, that through time, with the technological extension, there were a higher number of people who could be seen at the level of potential to be haves and have-nots. You have to get a definition of terms. And he posited from 1952 that this curve was coming into this modern era, and it was going like that, and it was heading for hyperbolic, and we crossed the 50. We're going to cross the 50% mark around 1972. From 1952, lived out his life, we crossed it in 1970, about the same time that the weapons became species lethal, signaling something new existentially. And if that's the case, if there's something to be said for that, it should be investigated. It should be brought up. It should be investigated. Have we actually transcended in our technological extension? Every day comes a revolution over the transom. We know how the brain works now. We're coming to the end like a gestation. We're coming to a new relationship. We're either going to eliminate or we're going to liberate. Not look 2,000 years into the future. We're liberating in our very own time the human species within an ecological order, good for the future. And we're not, it's not coming up. We're just reifying.
No, it is coming up. That conversation takes place all the time, probably along in places that you don't listen to.
Perhaps, yeah.
I
try to listen widely. Tell me who's good.
Well, who's good or who's speaking this language? I mean, it's Stephen Dinan and Deepak Chopra.
So
this last week, tens of thousands of people for a whole week, 7 days, 12 hours a day, have had a chance to use this technology to listen in on the development of a narrative, of a story that suggests a way out of the rape of the earth and the abuse of climate and the maldistribution of
Whose
resources.
story is it? What's the story? Is there a DVD
Well,
or something, or what's the story?
one voice
What's
in the
the
story-
theme? What's
yeah.
what's the pattern?
Okay, one of the voices in that story is Karen Armstrong and her notion of compassion.
She's a religion. She's a religious scholar. Yeah,
Yes,
very good, very
right.
good person.
And
yeah.
she's one who says that in fact it hasn't always been scarcity, that for much of human history it actually was abundance.
Well, I would argue, I would like to see Ms. Carr. When I talk about scarcity, you're not talking about food or clothing and that. You're talking about knowledge. You're talking about the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah. So
you're
all
talking
of these
about
people are having that conversation.
Yeah, but you're not just talking about food or that. What I'm saying, that's not scary. That's part. But you're talking also, it's existential. It's that it's Teilhard de Chardin. It's the phenomenon of man. It's getting to knowledge. We're coming to understand things. We're coming to where we can understand things without the old creation stories that had to give us self-reflective consciousness of narrative. Where is the narrative that's turning into it and has political relevance in terms of the fact that we're heading maybe not only for a great another recession, but a depression. It'll unleash irrationality. That's what I'm trying to say. Where are the intellectuals that are dealing with the political realities of that? The United States is putting drones all over the world. And that's the only solution they've got. Nobody's coming up with that I can see.
Yeah. Well, I'll reference a small book. I'll take the privilege of the
Thank
microphone.
you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't.
No,
rant.
that's all right. It's Herbert McChrystal's Quantum Sense.
Okay.
Just a little self-published book. He happens to be my brother-in-law.
Oh, good. Okay, good stock. Yeah.
He also happens to be the cousin of Stanley McChrystal.
I don't know. Stanley McChrystal.
Stanley McChrystal is the one who directed the use of drones in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Oh,
as
it
the
was
head of
McChrystal, the general.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, right.
So here you are in the same family.
Yeah, right.
The chiropractor, the visionary thinker who's written the book Quantum Sense,
Yeah.
and the cousin who's directing the use of the technology.
Is it published,
to destroy.
Quantum Sense? Is
Yes.
it worth reading? It's a good book. You
It's
like
a quick
it?
book, yeah. I
Yeah.
like it, but
Okay, yeah.
I'm a little biased in that.
Yeah,
But-
sure, yeah.
But the point is that the argument, I think, is precisely the response to your question. Where is this thinking taking place?
It isn't. I can't find it, hardly
Well,
at all.
Read Quantum Sense.
Okay, thank you. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
follow the bibliography.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of people think they can because they focus on one issue.
Yeah.
Racism or something.
There's a wonderful little tool of digital technology exploited most common in two forms called Nexus and Lexis.
Yeah, Lex has been around a long time
So-
for those who have the resources. Yeah.
So these are the tools that link ideas one to another by the way in which they cite each other, and then they tell us where the new areas of knowledge are emerging.
That's what we want. Pattern recognition, it's called.
Yeah.
Ray Kurzweil's pretty good. He said the singularity's
Yep.
coming.
Yep.
I like Ray Kurzweil. He makes sense.
Yep.
What you have to do is think. It's like we're in the womb. We're coming to a new, it's like almost punctuated equilibrium, a new relationship to the cosmos.
So what you and I both want is to
Liberation.
is to find out where that conversation has political reality and
Yes.
political possibility.
That's right. And how you can bring everybody in on that. Because you got to have, when you hoist capitalism on its own petard, you've got to have something not only that can be liberating of the masses are starving all over the world.
So you take that brief moment of the last campaign where Obama is using the notion of creative imagination and storytelling, got lost somewhere in the course of 2.5 years.
Well, talking to the debt limit and all the irrationality coming out of the political process and everything.
But there are those moments, there are those windows where people do ask precisely those questions. Where's the political narrative? Where's the political reality? Where's the political potential?
Well, it's
of
all wrapped up
reorganizing the
within
economy?
outdated paradigms. It's all paradigms of paradigms, and it's outdated, and they're not addressing it in any kind of a serious way because they've been co-opted. And I don't know. I don't know. I had a good thought, but it's escaped me now. But it's just coming. It's like the end of a. We're coming in. It's like it's like a residency, and we're just learning. This universe. We have to think about the universe. String theory tells us it's parallel universe. Second law of thermodynamics may be functioning. We need pattern, not specialization, not specializing in depth on one thing, but comprehensive specialization between all the disciplines. There should be a department of everything. There isn't. They break it down into all this in order to Especially, it's divide and conquer the intellectual process.
Well, that's what's going to kill me, and it sounds like it might kill you too, is wanting to understand everything and how it relates.
No, patterns of understanding. Fuller was a comprehensivist. There are people who are comprehensive, and you're looking for patterns. It's a new consciousness, and it's possible. In cybernetics, I had a friend whose father was in the room with Norbert Wiener when they coined the term back in '48, and pattern recognition permits pattern recognition. I mean, information overload. It's coming in every discipline, everything. It's like a quickening, and it's coming in everything, and it's coming, and it permits pattern recognition. You can see the whole pattern rather than the details that everybody focuses on. It's called the new.
James Fallow in information.
James Fallow writes
is
about it.
exploring some of that.
But it's not finding expression within the political context. It's not within the political economic context. They haven't worked out that thing. And what is our response? We're dropping drones on everybody all over the world.
How does Paul's libertarianism fit into this? I mean,
Ron Paul? I don't know.
He would seem to take us out of that dropping drones and bombing and warring.
Well, he would on that, but on the other, he hasn't got the.
He hasn't dismantled the federal.
He hasn't. No. What you need, if I may, it is a long thing. You need to have the risk and the swaps and derivatives and everything that came in. It was all done in the private sector. It should be in the government. There should be a capital diffusion reinsurance corporation behind an insurance industry of issues that have risk and the various levels of risk. There should be a division between those that are solid on road projects and everything, and then a crapshoot like venture. It shouldn't all be venture private sector. In terms of the insurance industry behind risk, dealing with the various levels of risk. You make it so it's solid, you get distribution of ownership of capital instruments that are producing wealth to the people, and one of the things it would do is free them to be able to do what they want to do rather than what some system tells them they have to do. That's the point. You need to think, nobody's addressing that economically. Our president, nobody's addressing it. It doesn't come up in the political dialogue at all.
I don't want to be flip at all, but it sounds to me as what you might be saying is 100% taxation.
No.
Redistribution.
The best thing has been laid out by a guy. There's a little for it. It's a fellow. The one that does it is a guy named Kelso. He wrote a book with Mortimer Adler, called The Capitalist Manifesto.
Yeah.
That you've got to extend ownership of the private sector capital assets responsible for production to everybody. And when they get ownership, they can have a means of having distribution of income to buy whatever it is they want to do on their own terms, because they would be, in a sense, liberated from having to go. Yeah, you can't stay and talk to your daughter who's just had a big emotional experience. You got to go down to the corporate thing to do something that you have to do in order to justify a paycheck.
At one level, the pension funds have started that process, haven't they?
Well, they haven't done it well enough. There was a thing called ESOP. They began to get some ownership of the corporate enclaves. That's a tiny thing. You got to have it all owned by the people, and people will be liberated.
The big Spanish cooperative.
Mondragon is going well. That's a good thing. That's anarcho. And that's going well in Basque Country and over into Barcelona. I think it's going well. It's coming here.
And there is a Swiss bank that's been around for about 40 years that
the Swiss,
this principle as well.
Yeah, but it's not, and the thing is time short. Because I think that they could just go right over the cliff and the whole economy will implode. Nobody's going to have money to buy, particularly if something happens here, and then that's going to unleash the irrationality of the weapons, and the weapons are species lethal. It's time to wake up, in my view, and it goes across the spectrum. And the Fellowship for Reconsideration is a good thing that helps along those lines. I'm sorry we run out of time. I'm ranting too much, but it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you. It's your pleasure, the President, Mark Johnson. Sorry we're going on, but I really am imbued with the fact that this is a really pregnant moment in the fullest sense. And so, thank you for all the good work. I'm sorry I ranted.